Our next speaker is Mr. Tom Countryman. Mr. Countryman was recently elected the chair of the board of the Arms Control Association, a nonprofit information and policy analysis organization in Washington, D.C. Until January, Mr. Countryman was the Assistant Secretary of State for Nonproliferation Affairs and also the Acting Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security. Mr. Countryman arrived from D.C. in Northampton this afternoon to speak to us tonight. We are honored to have you with us. Thank you so much, Mr. Countryman. Please welcome.
Thank you. I'd like to give my 15 minutes back to Dennis. Thank you for coming out. I think it is a remarkable statement about Northampton and about your interest in your world that extends well beyond your city and the state of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and I salute you for it. It's a real honor for me to be here. The Arms Control Association is a very small NGO. That's a not so subtle advertisement for more donors and more members, and there's information outside. But we are nonpartisan, and we attempt to demonstrate that a commitment to United States national security is absolutely consistent with the goal of reducing the threat of nuclear or chemical or biological conflict globally. So we pursue both goals. And with that in mind, let me build upon the last two speakers to say a little bit about why North Korea is dangerous and what especially concerns me about the current situation. I like to say that there are three big arms control issues in the world right now. The most important one is our relationship with Russia and the future of arms control between Moscow and Washington. The most urgent one is North Korea, for reasons that have already been described and that I'll expand upon. And the most unnecessary, or if you prefer, the stupidest one, is Iran, because there's absolutely no reason, other than an arbitrary choice of the White House, that we have to be worried about Iran's nuclear capability at this moment. But let's stick with tonight's topic, why North Korea is the most dangerous. We've already heard a little bit about their capabilities. They've done 6 nuclear tests. They are committed to a systematic program of testing and improving nuclear weapons based upon the same way that the United States, the Soviet Union, the British, the French, and the Chinese went about their program. You have to test to get better at it. Their latest test shows a warhead, or rather a device that, as Michael noted, is several times more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima in 1945. The number of warheads that they might possess is absolutely unknown. The number of devices they've built, we can't know. But intelligence experts like to guesstimate how much plutonium and how much enriched uranium, highly enriched uranium, the 2 different pathways for making a nuclear weapon they could have produced. And the answer tells you that they have somewhere between 20 and 60, and potentially in the near future, enough material for up to 100 warheads. They are expanding, again, in a systematic way, the same way other countries have done it. The range, the capability, and the accuracy of their ballistic missiles. We have no information as to whether they have yet perfected a re-entry vehicle that can protect a miniaturized nuclear device in its re-entry into the atmosphere. We just don't know that, but it is I hope you understand why. The responsibility not just of the president, but of the military and the intelligence agencies to assume that they are damn close to having that capability. It leaves a great deal, therefore, as they have developed capabilities, it leaves a great deal to say about what is their intent, what is the purpose of North Korea continuing to pursue these. And I'll say a couple of words about that. I think Michael had it right, that their primary goal is the survival of a regime that exemplifies communism in one family, that melds a Stalinist type of communism with a very Korean tradition of dynastic leadership. And they realize that they are poor and weak compared to neighbors such as South Korea, China, and Russia, and that they are out of step with the rest of the world when it comes to continuing this kind of, I don't care whether you call it Stalinism or fascism, they are both accurate descriptions of the North Korean regime. And therefore, to preserve the survival of the regime, they are counting upon having a nuclear weapon that is a credible threat to the United States, that will deter the United States from any serious action to overthrow the regime in Pyongyang. We'll talk perhaps a little more about their motivations as we go forward. Here's why I think that the current situation is dangerous. That the United States has not pursued what President Trump described in April as a strategy of maximum pressure and maximum engagement. There has been maximum pressure. There have been some good steps taken by the United States in step with other partners, particularly China, that increase economic pressure on the government in Pyongyang, and I strongly support those. We have not seen any evidence of the second part of the declared strategy, which is maximum engagement with the North Koreans. And in fact, the president has undercut efforts by my old colleagues at the State Department, as well as by his own Secretary of State, Mr. Tillerson, to pursue engagement. I argue for diplomacy because I know from 35 years' experience that it works. It doesn't always work. It often fails until it works. But there are enough situations, not just in which it has temporarily got the North Koreans to stop, to make an agreement, to do something rational, to open a chance for a better agreement. That's happened 3 times in the last 30 years. But I've seen enough situations where diplomacy prevented a situation that otherwise could have required the U.S. to act with military force and to put our servicemen at risk. Diplomacy, I believe, should always be the first resort rather than the last resort. I'm especially disappointed by the approach I've seen this year. I'm used to the leader of North Korea or the previous president of Iran saying outrageous, irrational, insulting things at the United Nations and elsewhere. I'm disappointed when the US president stoops to the same level of trading vulgarities. And in particular, it diminishes the United States in the eyes of the rest of the world, not just the people that you're insulting, but US allies as well, who have come to believe that the US, for all of its faults, for all of its inconsistency, is a credible leader of the democratic world. And when you add to that this president's readiness to abandon every agreement that his predecessor signed, you have diminished US credibility and diminished ability for the United States to conclude any kind of agreement, not just about nuclear weapons, but about trade or counterterrorism or any other topic and not just with our adversaries or our rivals, but with our allies as well. And I think Dennis described some of that dynamic at work the past week on the President's trip to Asia. I'm concerned because I can picture so many ways that this scenario could spin out of control and rapidly rise to the risk of an exchange of nuclear weapons, either in one direction or both directions. I think the likelihood of the President ordering a nuclear strike on North Korea, whether an all-out strike or a more limited one, is small, but it is not zero. It is possible that this is on the President's menu of choices today. Similarly, I think at the other extreme, the idea that North Korea would order a nuclear attack on any of its neighbors or on the United States without any kind of provocation is even smaller. But it's not zero. And as I said, it's not something that any president of the United States can afford to assume is zero. And in between those, there are a number of scenarios under which a conventional attack, a conventional provocation, a reaction to a misinterpreted signal sent from one side or the other could rapidly grow into an exchange, as Michael noted, of not only nuclear weapons, but as has been confirmed by the Pentagon. He noted the Library of Congress study, which is very interesting. Just last week, the Joint Chiefs of Staff replied to a congressional letter by saying, yes, in any scenario of conflict, North Korea has the capability to inflict hundreds of thousands of casualties in the metropolitan Seoul area within the first day. And that there is essentially no way to avoid it. I encourage you to read this letter from the military, from the Joint Chiefs to the Congress. So there's more than one scenario that gets you intentionally or accidentally, if not to an all-out nuclear exchange, to a situation of war on the Korean Peninsula, where hundreds and thousands of our allied citizens are killed within the first few days, and thousands of Americans, by the way, at the same time. I say all this because I think that there is a tendency to believe that rocket science or arms control science is an exact science. It is not. It is subject to the same vacillations, fluctuations, and just plain perversion of human behavior that any other political science is subject to. And in calculating, in developing strategic deterrence, in figuring out how to keep China, which, by the way, 50 years ago this week looked exactly like North Korea does today, that is, on the verge of developing nuclear weapons and with a communist leader who many in Washington thought was crazy. How do we keep China and Russia from unleashing their nuclear arsenal, each of them 1,000 times more destructive than North Korea's, upon the U.S.? Well, we've got years of experience in doing that. But we came very close 55 years ago in October of 1962 to an accidental conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. And some of you will remember it firsthand. But I think what is not remembered by most Americans, because it's only been revealed in the last few years, is how drastically Fidel Castro misunderstood what John Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev were doing. How drastically Kennedy misunderstood what Castro was after. Khrushchev misunderstood Castro. We were damn lucky that there was no nuclear exchange in 1962. And it wasn't a matter of just sheer brilliance on the part of Kennedy and Khrushchev. It was rather, what I want to attribute our good luck to is that Kennedy made sure that he was communicating directly and respectfully to Nikita Khrushchev. He did not assume, he did not make the most dangerous assumption you can make, which is to say, I know exactly how my adversary is going to react. He did not assume, he did not make another dangerous mistake, which is to assume my adversary is just plain crazy and unpredictable. But he didn't think, I know exactly what he's going to do at every moment. Rather, he focused on communicating clearly what we would do, what our priorities were, and to do that directly, respectfully, and privately. He worked hard to make sure that messages across the U.S. government were calibrated in that way. And still, we got through that by the skin of our teeth. That's what worries me today, because I don't think that we have a person capable of the same careful approach to North Korea. I think that we have massive, fragile egos at the head of two governments who are really incapable of judging accurately what the other will do, but capable of taking offense very readily. And so, in the end, this is what worries me perhaps the most, more than the technical characteristics. We can talk a lot more about not just pieces of legislation that Congressman McGovern mentioned, and there are others as well that deserve your attention, but a little more about the role of China, which is fascinating. Let me just leave you with President Kennedy's own conclusion drawn after the Cuban Missile Crisis was over, because it should be our guidepost today. He said, above all, while defending our own vital interests, nuclear powers must avert those confrontations which bring an adversary to the choice of either a humiliating defeat or a nuclear war. I would hope that could be the guidance for our leadership today. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.